Hello and welcome to my brilliant students. Today we're going to be going over our next lesson, and we're going to be going a little bit more in depth into plot and some of the elements of that plot. You guys have already done your Freytag pyramid, and the Freytag pyramid, to be honest with you, kind of simple, right? You guys have been seeing that for a while now. You're probably pretty familiar with it, and so now we're going to delve into some more concepts and probably introduce to you a couple of elements that you haven't heard of yet. So my objective today is to learn the elements of setting and the variations therein. There's a couple of different types of settings that we're actually going to be learning about today. I want to explore the different types of plots and the conflicts throughout literature and stories, because we don't just have the one Freytag pyramid, okay? There are different types of plot. There are different ways to track that conflict throughout the story, okay? And then finally, I want to examine and identify themes in literature. So, if you guys have your notes, I want you guys to be following along in your notes. You guys should have something like this, whether it be a physical copy in class if you wanted it, or whether it be a copy that was made for you in the Google assignments. And so it'll have these blanks here. And in those blanks, as we go through these notes, I want you to fill that out for your own benefit, all right? I'll look over that. Probably, we'll probably have that turned in by Monday, or I'll want to look over that at some point, just to make sure that you've got it and to make sure that you're keeping up, okay? And I don't think I'm going to necessarily take it for a grade, although I will if I need to ensure that you guys are getting it done. I would rather. I mean, sure, I'll do it for a grade and give you just like an easy 5 points, because I love giving you guys easy points, right? So go ahead and do it. Go ahead and show it to me. Make sure that I can see that you've been doing the work, right? And fill in your blanks as we go through our lesson today. Okay, so moving on to the very first thing, let's go over setting. Now, you guys have talked about setting, and you guys know that setting is basically time and place. So you know that the setting refers to the time and the geographical locations and the general environment and circumstances. And what I mean by general environment and circumstances is that it's not just, you could have a setting that is as simple as 1940s New York, right? But you could also have a general environment and settings that or a general environment and circumstances that are as complex as whenever you go into like a dystopian sort of novel like Mockingjay or The Hunger Games, right? Because that setting is technically like based on America, but Pan Am is completely different than America, right? And so you could have a variation on that. And so these are the settings that kind of prevail in the narrative, and the setting helps to establish, and this is important that you remember, the setting helps to establish the mood. And what the mood is how does that make you, the reader, feel? So if I was to sit there and if I was to say, on a bright and sunny day, as I was walking down the pristine path along the newly mowed grass, I stopped to smell a rose. What kind of mood does that kind of create? What kind of place am I in? And what kind of feelings does that evoke in you, the reader, as you're learning about where I am? And compare that to, say, like an Edgar Allan Poe, Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. Right? Like it's a different mood. It's midnight. It's dark. You're pondering over voluminous little books of lore that are mysterious and arcane and strange to you, right? And so it evokes these different feelings and moods depending on where you are. And so I want to kind of show that to you. I want to drive that home to you, because I want you to see these two pictures here. And what are the similarities here? Okay, what are the similarities between these two pictures? Just kind of pick a few of them out and tell me how they're the same. Okay, some things that I'm seeing. I see a path. I see leaves. I see trees. I see sky. I see a forest. Okay, and so for all intents and purposes, this might very well be like the same path or a very similar path, right? So how are they different? Well, whenever you look at the picture on the left, it's sunny, it's bright, the colors are vibrant, it looks peaceful, it looks calm, and the feeling that that mood evokes inside of me as I look at it is I say that looks like a very pleasant path. Whenever I look at the one on the right, it's foggy. The colors are a lot more dim. I see that the trees are not alive now that I think about it. Like the trees are not alive, and so the trees are all dead, and it kind of has this more foreboding, mysterious, perhaps even kind of scary sort of sense to it, right? And so that's how settings can change the mood, even whenever you have something like a similar or the same setting, right? Depending on how you describe it, it can change the feelings that are evoked in the reader. Now, there are two types of setting that I want us to talk about. The first one is an integral setting. Everyone say integral. And an integral setting is the setting that is fully described in both time and place, and it's usually found in historical fiction. Okay, so what I mean by integral is that you cannot have the same story if you don't put it in this setting. Okay, so if you were to put Star Wars into a different setting, you wouldn't have the same story, would you? Okay, because Star Wars was set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You have that right there at the beginning, and if you don't place it there in that setting, then you don't really have the true Star Wars experience, right? It's absolutely integral that, especially in sci-fi and especially in historical fiction, that it has to be at that time. If I'm reading a book, if I'm reading a historical book or a historical setting book like The Book Thief, which was set in World War II, okay, and it's about this little German girl and her adventures and the things that she's learning. She's a little Jewish girl, and she's like learning about the world that she's in and trying to maneuver around in it. Okay, right? And it's like it's not the same if she's not in 1940s Nazi Germany, correct? Okay, so that's what an integral setting is. You cannot, if you picked that story up and tried to put it anywhere else in any other setting, it just wouldn't make sense. A backdrop setting is the setting is vague, it's general, it helps to convey a universal sort of timeless tale. You get a lot of these in fables. Okay, and so this type of setting is found a lot in folk tales, and it typically just kind of sets the stage and the mood, and it's really just kind of skips along, and it says, all right, here's where we are. You could probably drop this in just about anything, right? And then it says a long time ago, or you can say long ago in a cottage deep in the woods, and once upon a time there was a great land that had an emperor. It's the reason why fables and folk tales so oftentimes get reinvented or reimagined into modern day era is because they're non-specific with the setting. So the setting is more of just a backdrop. The setting is more of just, hey, here it is. You can forget about it because we're mostly going to be worrying about the characters, right? And so that's what a backdrop setting is. You can pick those characters up, take the story and the plot, and put it down in another setting, and it would still make sense. And that's what a backdrop setting is. Okay. So next, we've talked about plot quite a bit. We've talked about the most important component of plot, that if you don't have it, you don't have a story, and that's what? Right, that's conflict. And so here is what a plot is. The definition is a series of interconnected events in which every occurrence has a specific purpose. And so a plot is all about establishing connections, suggesting causes, and showing relationships. Okay, we've talked about one type of plot, and we'll review that really quickly, but there are actually 4 types of plot. Okay, if you need to go ahead and write that down, go ahead and pause the video now, because I'm moving on. The first one is a dramatic or a progressive plot. This is a chronological structure which first establishes the setting and the conflict, and then follows the rising action through to a climax, and then it concludes with a denouement or resolution and a wrapping up of loose ends. And I have it right here. Does this look familiar? Because it's the same thing as Freytag's Pyramid. Okay, Freytag's Pyramid is a dramatic or a progressive plot. Okay, that is, as our understanding of plot has evolved beyond the 18th century German Man Freitags, right? We've come and we found more and different kind of complex sorts of plots that go beyond just the dramatic or progressive, but this is probably the most common throughout all of literature, and a lot of things can really fit into this structure. We don't have to review all of that right now. Just go back to my explanation of Freitag's pyramid if you want to go deeper into the dramatic or progressive plot. The next one is an episodic plot. And so this is a chronological structure. Both the dramatic plot and the episodic plot, they both just follow through time, right? Minute 1, minute 2, minute 3, minute 4, minute 5, minute 6, and so you just kind of move progressively through time linearly. And so that's what you call a chronological structure. And so an episodic plot does the same thing as a dramatic plot, but it consists of a series of loosely related incidents. So usually it's of a chapter length, tied together by common theme and or characters. Okay? Episodic plots work best when the writer wishes to explore the personalities of the characters, the natures of their experience, and the flavor of a particular era or a time. And so you'll have the rising action climax, it'll go back down, the rising action, the climax, it'll go back down, the rising action of the climax, and it'll go back down, and the different characters or the different events will all be related in some sort of way, right? It'll have one big, long, cohesive story. So what medium can you think of that uses episodic plots? I put it in italics. Episodic. What does that sound like? Episodes, right? So whenever you watch TV shows, those are episodic plots, especially if you watch oh man, the best episodic plot I saw all summer was Picard on CBS. And what it was you had a completely full episode that had a rising action, a climax, and then a resolution. Oftentimes they would have that cliffhanger so that you were hooked on to the next episode, right? But it would have the rising action, the climax, and then the resolution or denouement, and everything was related over this one large continuous story, but we were able to explore all of the different characters throughout that episode, or throughout those different episodes, right? So you get this a whole lot in television shows, all right? And you will get it oftentimes in books and literature, but this is, I mean, there's a reason why we call it episodic plots. It's because it runs like a TV episode, all right? Number 3 is a parallel plot, and you'll see here that I have the dramatic plot line, and I basically just copy pasted that same one, but I have a label here that says character 1, right? Because what a parallel plot is the writer weaves 2 or more dramatic plots that are usually linked by a common character and a similar theme. So you might have, say, character 1, and what a parallel plot does is it goes back and forth between 2 characters during the same time. You follow? So 2 characters might be experiencing the same event, or multiple characters might be experiencing the same event, but you're going to jump back and you're going to look at it from somebody else's perspective. So what I have here is you can think of a parallel plot as 2 dramatic plots overlaid one another as it follows multiple characters through the action. So I have here character 2, and character 2 is moving along the same timeline, right? But you can't read them at the same time. You have to go back and you have to jump back and forth between these 2 lines. Make sense? And the reason why we call it a parallel plot is I want you to look at how the lines here are parallel to each other. And you can actually have multiple parallel plots. You can have 1, 2, 3 characters, 4 characters, 5 characters. Game of Thrones has multiple characters that go through a parallel plot, and you can see the same events that occur through the eyes of different characters, right? So that's what a parallel plot is. It can be really good for characterization, and it can be really good to explore your different characters. And if someone can pull off a parallel plot, it's a really interesting way of writing. And a flashback. I think you guys kind of recognize what a flashback is whenever you go back in time, right, and begin remembering something. So a flashback plot is this structure conveys information about events that occurred earlier, and it permits authors to begin the story in the middle of the action. So you're right in the middle of the conflict, right? Let's say that the conflict really comes to a head in April of 2002, right? and then you're right in the middle of the conflict, and you go, oh, well, let me tell you how I got here. Right? The first thing I can think of is Emperor's New Groove. You know, whenever you are watching Emperor's New Groove, the very first scene is Emperor Kuzco, and he's very sad, and he's in the rain, and he's all alone, and he's supposed to be an emperor, but he's actually a llama, and he's like, let me tell you how I got here. And then he jumps back a few days, right? So you can start in April and then jump back to January, February, March, and then move through it until you come up to the modern time. So it permits authors to begin the story in the midst of the action, but later fill in the background for full understanding of the present events. Flashbacks can occur more than once in different parts of the story. So take a moment now and kind of think of a few movies that you can think of that fall into the category of a flashback. I actually mentioned during setting. I mentioned The Book Thief. The Book Thief is a flashback. Emperor's New Groove is a flashback, and let's see. Oh, I think that no, that's not. Oh, I'm trying to think. Help me out here, class. Go ahead and if you can think of any other flashback movies where someone's like remembering back, go ahead and drop a comment. And say this is the first flashback plot that I thought of, not as an assignment, just to go ahead and engage. And if we're in class, go ahead and shout out some of your flashback plots that you can think of, going back in time and then moving back through the story. Okay, so that brings us to conflict. And remember, conflict is the most important component of any story, and there are lots of different types of conflict, right? There are two main types, and you have internal conflict and external conflict. And for the most part, most conflict, the most variety is in external conflict, okay? Because the only kind of internal conflict that you can have is protagonist versus themselves. And that's where the protagonist must battle within themselves between two contradictory desires. So that's whenever you're watching things like The Call of the Wild, The Sixth Sense, Buzz Lightyear coming to terms with the fact that he's a toy in Toy Story, anything in the Rocky series. I have here Kronk from Emperor's New Groove with the devil on one side and the angel on the other. This is a moment of protagonist versus self, or internal conflict, right? This is Kronk arguing with his own moral compass on what he should do or who he is, okay? So that is your very first type of conflict, and it's the only type of internal conflict. Two big main types, internal, and the only type of internal is protagonist versus self. Now, the rest are all external conflicts. That's your other big category, okay? So whenever you have external conflict is something that is outside of the character or outside of the main protagonist. So you can have protagonist versus another, but that's been called in the past as man versus man. And so you have protagonist versus another is about as classic as it gets, one person fighting up against another person. So you have Star Wars Return of the Jedi, whenever you have that epic battle between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, as they've been basically jockeying for power and position throughout the entire series. You have Les Miserables, where you have Jean Valjean, who has been hunted by Javert for years and years and years, and there's finally like this final conflict between them, or this final confrontation. You also have one that I think you guys have probably heard of, and this is protagonist versus society. And this is whenever the protagonists are in conflict with an injustice within their society, and so they rebel in some form or fashion. Okay, this is super common in dystopian genres, like Maze Runner is one of these. Let's see, Maze Runner, one of these. Hunger Games is one of these. The Divergent series is also one of these. Like, dystopian genres are kind of like your generation has been kind of like marked by the release of all of these great dystopian genre type books. And what it is it's all protagonist versus society. You have Katniss, and you have the people who have rallied around the Mockingjay going up against the Capitol, right? Animal Farm also falls into this. If you guys ended up reading that last year, or if you end up reading that at some point, you have the animals on the farm who are personified, and they end up rebelling against the oppressive farmer on his own farm, okay? So protagonist versus society, some really great and fascinating conflicts within that. You guys are probably also familiar with protagonist versus nature, and that's whenever the protagonist must survive against the apathetic forces of the natural world. Okay. Anything that, and that can include anything that is natural. That can include storms and fires. That could include a gigantic swarm of ants that are trying to eat someone. It can really just include like the cold desolation of an alien planet like Mars, right? It can include just trying to survive. I mean, it's literally called survival. The entire conflict that centers around Tom Hanks in Survivor is him trying to survive nature, right? Him trying to survive nature and not go crazy internally while he's going through all of that. And Wilson, of course, helped him with the internal conflict. But yeah, that's like nature. The great thing about protagonist versus nature is like it's almost cold. Oftentimes, nature can be personified into like another character, and that character is almost always cold, or it's almost ferocious, or it's always like base or savage or animalistic. And so if you're going and you're fighting against like if your protagonist is being hunted by wolves, that's versus nature, because that represents that other that outside force, that force that is outside of civilization, right? It's uncivilized and it doesn't care about you. It's cold. Nature will kill you. We live in Oklahoma, and so I feel like we're actually pretty familiar with this. I feel like Oklahoma has any number of different ways that it tries to throw curveballs at us, right? Whether it be earthquakes or tornadoes or storms or hail or whatever it might be, right? So, the next internal or external conflict that I think that you guys probably might not have been be familiar with is the protagonist versus the machine. And the protagonists are in conflict with something that is man-made and that sees no need to maintain any level of humanity. So that includes the Matrix, that's Avengers, Age of Ultron. You see Ultron right here. This is actually the creation of Tony Stark. And then, of course, you have things like Frankenstein, because Frankenstein built his monster to try to overcome death. And Frankenstein's monster, quote unquote, Frankenstein's monster, ends up saying, well, I'm actually beyond humans. I'm better than humans. Okay? And he was a creation of Dr. Frankenstein. It doesn't have to literally be a machine, is one of the main things I want you to understand. This can be an artificial intelligence. This can be a monster that was created. This can be something that basically what it has to be is it has to be something that humans made and then it's gone running amok. Okay, the most common theme amongst protagonist versus machine type stories, those kind of conflicts, they often center around themes of, yeah, we can, but should we? You see what I mean? Yeah, we can make this super powerful artificial intelligence that will guard the entire world against alien threats, but should we do it? Okay? Yeah, we can make these machines that make life easier for us, but should we do it? All right? And you even have, now that I think about it, in The Dark Knight, Batman, the Dark Knight machine that Batman or Bruce Wayne creates that basically turns every cell phone into a GPS tracker of everyone in the city. And Fox, his friend, says, this is unethical and I don't agree with this. And as long as this machine is here, I'm not here. That is a conflict of man versus machine. Okay? And that's just something that I thought of off the top of my head. You also have protagonist versus fate or supernatural. This is when the protagonist is trapped in an inevitable destiny, or they have the odds heavily stacked against them by an unbeatable force. So Greek tragedies love for specifically protagonist versus fate. You can also say protagonist versus the gods, protagonist versus the supernatural. It's anything that is beyond our natural world, and that includes like alien beings. Okay, that includes things that are super powerful beyond our understanding. So that includes things like gremlins and aliens, and I have Independence Day here. You also have supernatural in the sense of like fate, like your inescapable fate, like in Final Destination or Oedipus Rex. Avengers in Infinity War, there's this great moment where Thanos says, I am inevitable, right? And that inevitability, that fact that you cannot fight against this force, this thing that seems unbeatable, unstoppable, impossible to defeat, That is what makes it fate or supernatural, okay? And I haven't even mentioned the first thing that people think of whenever we talk about supernatural, and that is angels and demons and the forces of heaven versus hell, right? Yeah, that plays into it, and that is actually fairly common in protagonist versus supernatural. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Supernatural, Constantine, all of those other movies where you're The Exorcist, if you're into some of those classic horror movies, those are all protagonist versus the fate or supernatural. Okay. Just another point on conflict. A single story may contain more than one type of conflict, although one often predominates. Okay? So, whenever we look at Lord of the Rings, we have multiple different conflicts, right? We have the one conflict, good versus evil, right? And within that good versus evil, we have to destroy the ring, otherwise, evil will prevail. Okay, but within that, you have multiple conflicts. You have conflicts between dwarves and elves. You have conflicts between Aragorn and Elrond. You have conflicts between the different factions of man, as Rohan and Gondor are kind of tangling for position, trying to decide if they're going to support one another. You have this conflict between Gandalf and Saruman, and Gandalf and the Balrog, and Gandalf, and really, I mean, like, a lot of conflict centers around Gandalf, doesn't it? Gandalf and the orcs, whatever it might be. And so you have all of these conflicts that are kind of intertwined and infused under the umbrella of good versus evil. So conflict provides the excitement, and it makes possible the growth and development of the protagonist character. Using our example here, just think of Sam at the very beginning of Lord of the Rings, whenever he's like, I don't even want to leave. I like this place. This place is dope. The Shire is awesome. And yes, it is. If there was anywhere I'd want to live, it would be in the Shire. He's like, Shire is cool. Why would we want to go? And he says, well, I'm a faithful friend. I'm going to go with you, Frodo. So I'm going to go. And then by the end of it, he's like the bravest adventurer of all of them. Okay. So conflict gives, and I think that's a lesson, and I think that's one of the reasons why we keep going to stories and keep going to conflict, why conflict is so important, because without conflict in our lives, we don't have a chance to grow. If there isn't even like an internal conflict, if there isn't external conflict, if there are not problems for us to solve, if there aren't things for us to play and for us to compete and for us to figure out, then that makes for a boring life. And honestly, life is full of conflicts, and it's just a matter of how you decide to deal with them and how you're going to grow in them. So, moving on, just to kind of touch and go on this really quickly, the theme is the main underlying idea of a piece of literature, and it is usually woven subtly. Sorry, that needs to be underlined. Subtly into the fabric of the story rather than being lectured or preached by the author. In fact, if you have a theme and the author begins like preaching it at you, right, and they're just like, this is what you should think, and da-da-da-da-da, and da-da-da, that's not great writing. Okay, that is not a well executed theme. The themes that you often will see in children's and young adult literature is problems of growing up and maturing, such as an adjustment to society, love and friendship, achieving one's identity, and finding one's place in the world. All of those connect very strongly with not just children, but teenage. Really, I mean, it connects with everybody. Like, I'm an adult, and I'm still learning about my own identity. I'm still adjusting to aspects of society. I'm still learning about love and friendship and my place in the world, right? That doesn't end. And so those are common themes, especially in YA literature, young adult literature. And I have here that really heart-wrenching moment whenever Andy, right, there's this theme all throughout the Toy Story of like growing up, and it's personified in Andy, and Andy is sitting here and he says, hey, I don't want to just like dump these off. I don't want to, sell them in a garage sale. These guys mean really a whole lot to me. And he goes and he finds this other little kid, this little girl, Bonnie, I can't remember her name, and he gives her the toys and he says, take care of them. They mean a lot to me. Okay, yeah, and I mean, Andy was my childhood. He personified my childhood, and there was a point where I had to give up my things, and I had to grow up and adjust, right? And so, like, that one hit deep. Okay, that one hit me hard, and that's just one of the ones that I think of just immediately. And so he's learned about love and friendship from his toys. He's learned about how to adjust from his toys. He's learned about achieving his own identity and his place in the world. And as he's going out to explore that on his own independently now, right? Like, he pays homage and he pays honor to all of his toys and his friends. So those are common themes. We're going to go over subject and theme next because there is a distinction and a variation in that. And it's going to be really, really important that you're going to be able to identify what themes are, that you know what themes are. I wanted to just kind of like give you the definition and give you a couple of examples of common themes, okay? And we'll do that some more here coming up. Beyond all of that, I hope that you were able to fill out the entirety of your notes. I hope that this was helpful. A lot of this is on your test. I think pretty much all of the blanks are going to end up being on a test. So make sure that you do study that. Make sure that you do go over that. And if you need to, go ahead and rewatch this video. All right. So with all of that said, I hope that you guys have a wonderful day, and don't stop learning, my brilliant students.